Welcome to Left, East to West with me, Nikki Hill.
And me, Tom Parkin. Nikki, do you know how Prime Minister Mark Carney used to be executive chair of Brookfield? Remember? Right? But before 2005, do you remember what that company was called?
Yeah, I think it was Brascan, right? It was the company owned by the Bronfman brothers in the 80s and 90s.
Right. And Brascan was a contraction of Brazil Canada, a company that was owned by some pretty rich Canadians. It owned phone systems, power generation, lighting, street trams, all that kind of infrastructure stuff in a whole bunch of Brazilian cities. So we have kind of an intricate relationship with Brazil, and also now shared experience of Trump tariffs.
Yes, things we don't want to share with anyone, but similar pains. And the president that's dealing with that is a social democrat, Lula, so facing off against a very obviously and proudly Trump-backed opponent in October elections this year. Today, we have the privilege of having a really well-known Brazilian political commentator with us who has also some background in Canadian politics. So we're welcoming Sabrina Fernandes to give us some insights, because it's a really active question here about whether Brazil's president will be a friend to Canada after the election, or really a servant to Trump as we go through these geopolitical pressures we have in the last couple of years. But also, we're going to talk about how Lula and others built the Brazil Workers' Party and govern with it and what we can learn from that.
Yeah. And just, 213 million people in Brazil, world's seventh most populous state. And by GDP, it's 10th largest, just below Canada at number 9. They have a lot of auto assemblies. They have a big steel sector, a big mining sector, big forest products, big on food, an oil exporter. So, they're a federation. Does this sound familiar? I mean, this is kind of our doppelganger of South America in many ways.
Yeah.
So sitting down with Sabrina in a minute will be interesting for thinking about, can we, with a president like Lula, shape a better Americas? Or will Lula lose, and it's going to be more like an alliance of Bolsonaro and Trump, continuing the kind of attacks that we've already seen. Okay, so let's be back with that interview right now. Sabrina Fernandes, welcome to Left, East to West. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Nikki. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah. In Brazil, you're well known as an author on politics, especially the politics of the left. You're a frequent opinion writer, a political commentator. You're a senior leadership fellow with the Alameda Institute, and you're joining us today from Sao Paulo. But some Canadians will already know you because you did an undergraduate degree in economics at St. Thomas University in Fredericton, and then an MA in political economy and a PhD in sociology at Carleton in Ottawa, right?
Yes. So, I had a full 10 years in Canada. I do go back from time to time, but I miss Canada. I hope to come back for a longer time now.
That's great.
That'd be great. No, we love having you on. Okay, we have so many questions for you. And I think there's been lots of themes in our first 6 months of the show we probably want to dig back into as well today with you. But we haven't talked about Brazil. And so a lot of these will be first-time questions for probably many of our listeners. But I know we have a lot of Lula fans in our listenership as well. So recently, Trump imposed a 25% tariff on a wide range of Brazilian goods, replacing the 10% tariff struck down by the U.S. courts in February. A lot of that U.S. motive goes back to the Brazil Supreme Court orders against Twitter X. I still insist on calling it Twitter, and Meta after the events of January 8th, 2023. But another key piece there is PIX, which is the most used non-cash payment method in Brazil. Can you tell us a little bit about the court orders and PIX specifically, and how Trump's latest tariffs are being handled by Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva? Is it helping or hurting his main opponent in the upcoming elections, do you think? So lots of topics there to break down.
Yes, well, let's start with the background with how the tariffs hit Brazil last year, because I think that was a big
Mhm.
part of the debate. This was around the time that we had a court order to arrest Jair Bolsonaro, the former president of Brazil, who's the father of the new candidate, Flávio Bolsonaro, who's running against Lula. So he's the preferred candidate from the right and the far right in Brazil. And we know that the Bolsonaros are very close to Trump. Probably the Bolsonaros think they're closer to Trump than Trump is truly close to them, but they use that in their favor, right? So they're always talking about Trump. They're wearing MAGA hats, and one of the sons of Bolsonaro, Eduardo Bolsonaro, is actually living in the U.S. right now because there is an arrest order against him in Brazil because of the attempted coup on January 8th and other things that we could just basically just put them under the umbrella of treason, basically. So he was a congressman in Brazil, and then he decided to just kind of give up on his seat, even though he stayed in the U.S. already, getting paid every month before he finally gave up on the seat. And the thing is that they kept negotiating terms around the tariffs and PICs and the arrest of Bolsonaro with Trump. Every time they met with Trump, every time they made these big speeches in the US, and they kept saying that, well, Lula is not handling the country properly. Lula is not respecting our biggest ally, so saying the US is the biggest ally. And because of this, then, Trump is just got to do what he has to do. And we respect that. And we're close to him. So we're the ones who will be able to handle him once everybody just elects one of the Bolsonaros to power once again. So this is what they've been playing around with. But the thing is that Lula did handle the first tariff situation quite well last year. I think you may remember he was like on the cover of a lot of newspapers internationally. They were praising him, like The Economist was praising him. Wow, he's handling this so well. He's talking about sovereignty and the autonomy of the country. And I know this debate was very important during the elections in Canada too. So this conversation around how sovereign are we when it comes to the U.S. That can help a leader, and this has helped Lula. Most people do think that he handled this quite well. He was able to basically compensate for some of the losses because Brazil has gotten a lot closer to China over the years. So we're not as dependent as before. However, there are a few sectors in Brazil that are still quite dependent on the U.S., and it's mostly agribusiness when we're talking about it. And these new tariffs, they're targeting specific goods. And there's also another threat around it, which is the threat that the tariffs could go up from 25% to 37.5% regarding commodities that the U.S. government is claiming are being produced with slave labor. And the interesting thing here is that they're not interested in human rights, right? Not at all. That's not the issue here. The issue is that this was phrased by the U.S. ambassador to Brazil as, well, unfair competition, right? They're benefiting from slave labor. So that, of course, they can compete a lot better than we can. We'll know this in a couple of weeks. But in a way, the Brazilian government has already issued a statement already talking about retaliating, some other conversations around it. And the Bolsonaros are just saying, well, see, this is another proof that Lula cannot handle things, is going to hurt the situation a lot more. But in the end, we do know that Trump is playing these cards also as a way of trying to pressure the electoral situation that we have coming up in a couple of months, right? It's been this way in the region for a while. There's this right-wing turn in the region. So we just saw this in Colombia, and we saw this with Honduras, with Chile, and he's basically building his caucus in the region. So even though Trump does handle Lula sort of like in a more business mindful way sometimes, they sit down, they talk. Of course, Trump wants Lula out. That's for sure.
Just give us a quick update. I saw a poll yesterday that showed that the Bolsonaro seems to be fading. Is that the sense?
I'm not that optimistic because I do know that things tend to take quite a
Yeah.
turn. Like if you just look at the situation in Colombia, right? That also took quite a
Mhm.
turn. A lot of people just thought that, Abelardo de Espriella could not win at all, and then that's what happened. These like latest poll, what I find that it's really important to focus on is the number of undecided people. So we still
Mhm.
have people pending to the right or to the left. That's always
Right.
our debate. So for the first round or the second round, these undecided people, they also fall within the margin of error. So that means that, Lula could be first in the first round, but in the second round, he still may lose if those people go towards Bolsonaro. And they might go towards Bolsonaro not because they're far right. They might go because
Right.
they hate the left or they hate Lula. That
Mhm.
sentiment is still quite strong. That sentiment is an old sentiment in the country. And it's been part of the debate of whether the Brazilian left is able to be renewed or not.
Brazil has a lot of assembly plants, auto assembly plants. You got a big car industry, bigger than Canada's, in fact. Got a big steel industry, big forest products industry. So, like Canada, Brazil is affected by Trump's sectoral tariffs on steel, autos, and lumber. Uh, Something quite different, though, is you have only about 10 or 12% of Brazilian exports going to the United States compared to somewhere around 75% for us. You also have big food exports and big crude oil exports. And a lot of that goes to Brazil's biggest trade partner, China. Uh, Trump's national security strategy says the resources of the Americas are U.S. resources, and it has made it clear he wants to stop trade with China and investment in the Americas from China. So, what are Lula and Bolsonaro saying about trade? And how do the two of them position with respect to not just the United States, but also obviously Trump wants to squeeze China out, and Lula or Brazilians might see China as a bit of a hedge.
Well, something to note is that the Brazilian far right is not exactly anti-China. It's not that they're going to say,
Mhm.
"Oh, let's cut off our relationship with China
Mhm.
completely, and we're just going to side with the U.S." They want the U.S. to be the primary partner for everything and to have first dibs on the resources and the contracts and everything like that. But there's a place where Bolsonaro and Lula kind of converge, which is agribusiness and agro exports.
Mhm.
They do want the best for every business, and they might manage it quite like a little bit differently. But in the end, Lula usually grabs that, under his mandates, agribusiness has been able to access more credit, agribusiness has grown and
Right.
profited a lot more. And we also know that agribusiness was kind of upset with the Bolsonaro camp with the way they handled a few things with China, because China is a great market for agribusiness commodities, including beef exports.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
recently, so last year, China imposed these big tariffs on beef imports from other partners. So that impacted Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay. So this like big livestock exploitation area over here. I think it impacted the U.S. as well. Because the excuse given by China, well, this is hurting our internal livestock industry. So it's
Right.
interesting because the Bolsonaro camp is using this. They're saying, see, you're claiming that Trump's tariffs, they're very political. But no, China is also imposing tariffs on Brazil. And
Mhm.
Lula is handling
Mhm.
everything so terribly because now it means
Right.
that, it's a 55% surtax on Brazilian beef. And agribusiness is obviously quite upset with how this is
Yeah.
happening with China as well. It's a surtax that's supposed to last about 3 years. So this is obviously having an impact. But at the same time, Brazil was able to negotiate a quota and has the largest quota out of those countries. So the tax is only imposed after you breach that quota. And this is something that's part of this, he said what, and no, but he said this other thing. And this fight is still kind of ongoing over here. But it's quite clear that they have preferences. Lula would rather side with China as a primary partner, the Bolsonaros with Trump. But the thing is that Lula is also looking to diversify some of these partnerships. And I think, the Mercosur European Union deal was part of this. There are other things involved. But also, I would say that the main difference here is that there's a little bit of an industrial strategy behind what Lula is doing. I would say, based on my research, that it hasn't been that successful. There's still a lot to go in terms of that, when we can get into this later on. But generally, the Bolsonaros, they just want to export commodities because that keeps the money in the same pockets as before.
Right.
So it is about their own partners and, the national elites that they're used to working with. Whereas there's a little bit more of a national development project coming on from the PT side, from the hegemonic left side.
Interesting. We're going to do a little pivot here. And I know Tom's been keen on this question because it came up recently when Kristi Noem was appointed to an advisory role with a BC-based mining company. So all of a sudden, we had some little attention around what else she's been doing. And that has been since March, when Trump created a new multinational organization, the Shield of the Americas, and then did name Kristi Noem to be the first and envoy to it. So we've seen it pitched as an intelligence sharing organization against drug cartels, and notably Colombia and Mexico didn't join, Brazil didn't join. Canada probably wasn't even invited, although, we see a lot of claims from the U.S. president about the fentanyl coming from Canada as a national emergency for the U.S., which isn't the case. What's your take on the new organization and why Brazil didn't join?
Well, I think Brazil didn't join because that would be just a big trap for Brazil. And I think it was the same thing with Colombia. Sovereignty is a really big issue in the region. We're used to seeing U.S. intervention coming from every side of things.
Yeah.
And we understand that this organization is basically a space for right-wing governments, for them to become, these, lackeys of Trump, basically, helping to assure Trump's dominance. Even though, there's a lot of influence of the U.S. in other spaces are supposed to be multilateral in the region, like the OAS, where the U.S. is quite dominant, but there's still hurdles, some questions, some pushback in the OAS. So Trump wants something else, and he's getting in. And the thing is that if you don't join, you're also subject to other approaches regarding security. So security has become a huge thing, right? It's what's been justifying, quote unquote here, Trump's extrajudicial killings in the region.
Yes.
So in the Caribbean,
the abduction
basically.
Of Maduro.
The abduction of Maduro, what's been happening with ICE, some of the deportations, the connections with Bukele in El Salvador, a lot of this is connected. So, of course, he's using this because we understand that, just going about imposing things and changing decrees and having my own way, Congress might, at some point, Congress is going to strike me down, like what happened with the tariffs. But if I use security as an excuse, we know that has worked in the U.S. for many, many decades, right? This is something that they say. And there's a key word here, is terrorism. If they use the word terrorism, if they say that this is about a new war on terror, and this war on terror is about fighting drug cartels, it's about making sure you're getting rid of violent gangs that are also oppressing people in these other countries in Latin America, things can kind of become justified. And I think what we're seeing right now is actually terrifying, right? Because it's worrisome for Cuba. Cuba is a target. We've seen this before. They start associating leadership with drug cartels, and this is the first step. But it's also worrisome for us in Brazil, and we had just recently the U.S. reclassifying some of the big drug organizations in Brazil as terror organizations. So that goes for PCC and the CV, and it's basically the U.S. saying that you cannot handle your own security issues.
Right.
This is affecting the entire region, so we're going to take over. And there's been a few statements coming from the Brazilian Foreign Office on this already. So Mauro Vieira talked about how this is a way of basically unleashing the power of the U.S. Army on us if they want to do it. the Trump said this directly when he created this organization. Oh, it's like, we have to use our military. You have to use your military. So this military alliance, as we've known before, led to military dictatorships in the region. We know the history in Chile with Allende. We know the history of all of the other interventions, including here in Brazil. So, of course, this is something that we're quite worried about, especially considering that this is a region where a lot of the countries, even the right-wing governments throughout the years, the more democratically inclined right-wing governments, they do not have an inclination towards war. It's not about evading each other. We had this way back in the past where we were trying to fight over, the colonial scraps. But for the past decades, the past century or so, it has not been our inclination. So there's some investment in the military. But let's say if anything had to happen in terms of the U.S. actually using military power over Brazil, I'd say that this is going to be a huge issue. So governments trying to deal with this. And like Lula has always said that Latin America is a region for peace. But of course, this type of intervention is something that we should all be worried about. And I would say, it's also reason to worry in Canada. It's not a joke when they're talking about like the 51st state and things like that.
Or the
we need to take
fentanyl,
this
right?
quite seriously. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like it's very we know that he does not care about the fentanyl situation in the U.S. Like he does not care about the use of child slave labor in, coffee plantations. But he's looking for specific excuses that will give him some moral high ground to say, oh, well, I need to go and I need to act.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've seen that kind of pressure being put on Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico too, right? If you don't act against the drug cartels, we'll basically invade your sovereignty and we'll take care of it. And it's just another way of pressurizing her. And I guess that's the play, right?
Yeah, it's even harder,
we're
right?
also
In Mexico and Canada, it's
Yeah.
the border. What can you do?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very
We're also
close
seeing
to
a
the
big
border
push.
here.
Now, this kind of also relates back to Kristi Noem. The company that Nikki was talking about, that Kristi Noem is working for in BC, is a mining company. It is a critical minerals mining company. And we're seeing a big push by Trump to gain control of critical mineral stockpiles separate from China, so push China out of the way as a supplier wherever possible. This is kind of part of the national security strategy document. Brazil, like Canada, has some of the world's biggest critical mineral reserves. In May, Lula met with Trump in Washington. And from my reading, I understand this was on the agenda. But Lula said that he wants Brazil's critical mineral ores to be processed in Brazil. And that may have been a bit of a block with Trump, who preferred, the status quo. Like, let's just ship raw resources and let it be done with. So, some value-adding ideas from Lula. Then I noticed that more recently, in the last couple of weeks, there's been some EU international trade commissioners come to Brazil and going down to visit some mines. So, what do you think is going on in this play about critical minerals in Brazil? What maybe can Canadians take from our own? How there's a larger story that we were both part of.
Yeah, well, in the global south, having minerals, having, mining reserves, that's a curse, basically, right? Because everybody's eyeing you. They want a piece of it. And historically, we have not been able to properly use those resources for our own development. So that's the colonial legacy right there. But something I think, something I like to highlight is that Lula does talk a big talk when it comes to mining, but it's very weak policy-wise. We're in a country where we basically don't have a strong mineral policy. What's being debated in Congress right now is coming from the right wing because the left took too long to do something about it. If you consider the way that mining is dealt with in Brazil right now, basically the state provides concession licenses to all of these mining companies, and it's mining companies from the US, from Canada, from Australia, from China as well. And they're here and they're only required to pay from like 2 to 4% tops on what they're making. regarding all of these resources. And this includes lithium, for example. Lithium exploitation in Brazil, in Minas Gerais, is being eyed by many companies. We have Canadian companies operating there. Sigma Lithium, for example, which is right now stuck in a huge court case because the level of the sacrifice zone in the region where this lithium is being extracted has gotten to a point of, drawing out illnesses for all of the families involved. People are not being able to go back and forth in the region without having to get help because the company is not letting them circulate properly. Lots of things happening right now regarding this. And what do they pay? 2%. So we're really behind when it comes to this, and just saying that, well, this time you can come and get resources, but you need to process it at home. It's just like a very weak strategy around, processing, like midstreaming and downstreaming around industrial policy, where you're not actually choosing what you produce. You're still letting foreign corporations come and say, well, we want these super magnets and this is going to be for this. We might produce here, so we'll pay more taxes and we employ a few more people. But how sovereign is really the situation where you're not really even choosing that perhaps this one piece of mining reserves here, we're not going to use that. This ecosystem is too fragile. These communities cannot be exposed to radioactive materials like is the case with rare earth mining, right? So the one mining company that's been operating already in Brazil without proper legislation for this, which is a Serra Verde group in my state of Goiás, they're responsible for 4 of the key rare earth minerals that Brazil is producing right now. And they just got acquired by a U.S. company. And they got acquired just right under our noses. These things are just happening. This was, I believe, in May. And now the U.S. has a free pass because we still don't have proper legislation on this. And when Lula and Lula's camp, when they talk about this, they will talk about getting more royalties and maybe forbidding interventions and mining in indigenous territory, which is better than the right, but it's still insufficient if we're considering the impact. And we're considering that this is not a sovereign strategy at all. Conversations that we've had over maybe creating a national mining company again, because ours got privatized many years ago, but having it for...
Well, Canadians will know that mining company. Of course, it's Vale. That owns the Sudbury nickel mine, the nickel mine in Thompson, Manitoba, and the mine in Labrador. I can't remember the name of it, but yeah.
Yeah, they're
so a lot of Canadians will know Vale.
Superpower. Well, we know what Vale is capable of doing, right? And but even though we started talking, like people were debating, like the intellectuals on the left, oh, maybe we should create Terabras. Like we have Petrobras for the oil company, Terabras for rare earth minerals. And then, key people in the government in Lula's camp just said, oh, no, that's not really a viable thing. No, we're not even going to entertain that. So how would your industrial policy or your green industrial policy look like if you're not really, trying to build something else? It's about still attracting foreign direct investment and making these concession deals, but grabbing more royalties out of the way. So like in my own research, because I do a lot of research on sacrifice zones from extractivism and the way that's really put the unjust on the transition. A lot of things that being pushed for around decarbonization or, conversations around building renewables, they are treated as tiny little details along the way because they're just seen as, these green windows of opportunity. But how big are these windows in terms of green industrial policy if you're not really ensuring that the people have decision-making power around this? Because as of right now, these minerals can be mined, let's say rare earth minerals like neodymium, they can be mined in Brazil. And yes, they could be an important super magnet for wind turbines somewhere. But they could also be used in, missile submarines from the U.S. You're going to lose them. We're not even trying to track them across the supply chain. And if we don't have a hold on this, just saying that, well, you can come, but you have to process it at home, you might get into a situation like Indonesia, where Indonesia did this to their nickel. Indonesia has high-grade nickel, so it's highly sought after. But they're processing nickel at home, but the car batteries used in Indonesia for the cars that are actually purchased by Indonesians, they don't require the nickel. So you're still having to import it from somewhere else. I'd say that's not really good industrial policy either.
Yeah, but something we see in so many jurisdictions. So it's fascinating. I think it's almost like the Trump presidency is making people pay attention again to their industrial policies in ways they probably never considered.
Yeah, forces us to look at ourselves.
Yeah. Let's key in a little bit on Lula and how he built the PT into a governing party. So he was the first PT president, winning in October 2002, reelected in 2006. Dilma Rousseff, also from the PT, then won 2010, 2014. PT candidate Fernando Haddad lost to Bolsonaro in 2018. But then Lula came back, won again in 2022, and is then seeking re-election in October. So lots of wins for them. But before that, they also did a lot of losing. So where does the PT come from? And how have Lula and others built the PT into a party that now has held the presidency for most of the last 25 years? What sort of need are they filling in Brazil?
Yeah, the PT was founded in 1980, right? So it's been around a while, but it was also founded in a really particular scenario in Brazil, right? Where we were still under the military dictatorship that was supported by the US. There was still a lot of repression. I mean, like Lula got arrested and repressed. Dilma Rousseff was tortured in prison by the dictatorship. And so it was a party that had to be born out of this big progressive democratic alliance. So we could say maybe like a social democratic alliance, but it also had an important role played by the peasant struggle in the country, an important role played by the progressive church, what we call the liberation theology. So they helped to establish communities throughout the country talking about these values. And of course, trade unions played a big role. Lula came from a trade union. It's where the PT still has like a strong base in the sector. But throughout the years, a lot of things changed. I mean, trade unions don't have the power in Brazil that they used to have in the past. You know, legislation changed, and then we got into like platform work and precarious work. So this base is also eroding in terms of its own power, which is creating a lot of crisis. And I think there's a major issue throughout the timeline, which is 2016, 2017, when Dilma Rousseff suffered from a parliamentarian coup. She got impeached over a technicality that was basically invented to impeach her, because later on they just legalized it. And then they used this as a way to get her out. Michel Temer, who was her VP at the time, he took over. He started implementing this big austerity agenda. And ever since, we're basically just like, living through the impacts of this, because this made room for Bolsonaro to come in. To give you like a very simple example of this. So when Temer got into power, betting companies, like online betting companies that we've seen throughout the World Cup, right? They were just happening, right? They were just being born at the time. So he legalized them. Yes, you can operate in the country. And then he left the door open to actually, make some rules, make sure that they can get regulated. Bolsonaro sat on this for 4 years, did nothing. And then these companies exploded throughout the country, to the point that we have an epidemic right now of, suicides, people having their whole lives ruined because of the betting companies. They took over issues of debt. Have gone up from a country where poor people are already heavily indebted. And now Lula tried to, apply some changes. Congress, because it's a far-right Congress, did not let him do what was necessary. So the most of the government could get out of it was some taxation. And even that, it's not enough, right? Thankfully, we were able to keep Polymarket and Cauchy at bay, because I think that the elections in Brazil would be much worse right now if we were handling this.
There you go.
Yeah, but we're just we had this gap, and this gap helped the right wing to get installed in many areas of the country, and the PT is still kind of trying to handle this. And they, they're very melancholic. They're thinking of like their past victories and not really organizing towards bigger victories post Lula. we might make sure, I'm helping with the campaign. We want to make sure that Lula wins this year, but then what? What do we do after
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what coalition does he leave behind? And that that's what the PT, the Workers' Party, has won 5 of the last 6 presidential elections, but has never held anything close to a majority in the federal Senate or the federal Chamber of Deputies. I think my research showed that turned up that the only 4 of the 27 governors of federal entities are PTs. So they have won the presidency, the highest position, 5 out of the last 6 times, but they can't build a ruling coalition that'll back them in the legislatures or in the states. What's the story on that? Why has the left been so fragmented and unable to pull in behind those presidential wins? But also, how has Lula been able to do anything when he doesn't have a legislative majority?
Yeah, well, that's the key question that I've been pursuing for many years. My PhD dissertation at Carleton was actually about this, was on the fragmentation of the left and trying to understand this in a global scenario. And basically, some of the conclusions that I've had is like, well, this is not a progressive country. So it's really hard to translate things, like things don't cascade, right? It's like if let's say, if you have a PM system, then you do have to match what you have in Ottawa with the leadership. Because we have these 3 powers, in Brazil, the legislative has always kind of gone in one direction and the executive has gone in another direction. And when the executive is in, when it comes to the left, because, for Bolsonaro, they were completely aligned, right? But when it comes to the left, the PT has always kind of had to negotiate with Congress. And at first, they thought that was possible in terms of, we give you, some of these other right-wing parties, more democratic right-wing parties, will give you, a ministry. We'll give you something in the cabinet. You get access to specific things. And then they got really used to getting things. So now they have a lot more power and they keep negotiating in that sense. And with the PT really does not have the upper hand at the moment. And I think that's something to consider as well, that, for example, out of the PT governors, one of the governors is the governor of Bahia, Jerônimo, and he is basically the head of one of the most violent police bodies in the country. So the popular base is not happy with this PT governor because this PT governor is oppressing them. So the party gets into its own contradictions, and then it becomes really hard. Like, one of my jobs is actually to, try to explain to people, yes, these contradictions exist, but we need to pressure them from the progressive side and not just kind of, throw everything away. But as these contradictions start getting, kind of thrown in our direction all the time, it becomes complicated. People kind of get disillusioned, and I think that explains why it's very hard to advance. And it builds within this anti-PT sentiment that I've mentioned has been around since forever. It was really pushed by the Brazilian dominant media. They were a huge part of it. And now with social media, especially the past 10 years, the role of YouTubers, these online influencers for the far right, they're really spreading not just fake news, they're spreading panic and misinformation. And that ecosystem is really hard to fight.
We've been talking a lot about the equivalent in Canada and the far right as well, in that sort of community, and partly why we started this podcast. So, it's.
We look, if we could just aside for a second, we look back at the convoy, which was, I guess, 2022, January 2022. There's all that kind of mega influencer social media thing happening. There's a lot of it happening around what's going on in Alberta separatism, and there was a lot going on around when Bolsonaro's people tried to, when they ransacked the federal legislature and the Supreme Court in 2023. So these are not isolated, right? This is a
it is, and there's also funding. We need to be aware of this, right? There are international organizations that fund these social media network of people, and they meet each other. We've seen this a lot in the region, like a far-right influencer from Brazil who became very good friends with a far-right influencer in Argentina that helped with the Milei election. Then they just keep building on each other. And the ones here in Brazil, they admire so much the ones in the US. So we know that they talk. There is some sort of like a right-wing international going on, and it operates at many different levels, right? And we need to fight on all fronts because of this.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're wrapping just with one last quick question for you too, sort of about similar structures from Canada and Brazil. So, with the Brazil federal government, similar to Canada, providing substantial transfer payments to state governments and education, healthcare, infrastructure. So, fiscal federalism is always a very active topic in Canada, particularly when provinces are running deficits, which is the case right now. So, there's a lot going on between provincial federal negotiations right now, and actually kind of live probably while we're airing this as well next week. How have PT presidents used federal fiscal power?
Yeah. I remember being 18 and it was like my introduction to Canadian politics class, like in poli-sci classes at St. Thomas, and like hearing about like, provinces haves and have-nots. I was like, oh, that sounds similar. Like it's not provinces in Brazil. But that debate is also like a very far-y debate here. We do have states like São Paulo, where I'm currently living, is like the richest state in the country. And a lot of people here are saying, oh, we're just, providing for people everywhere else. So the issues right there. The things that over the past years, and mind you, I'm not like a big fiscal specialist, but I like to offer a specific angle here. There's this concentration of, fiscal power on the state at the executive level, right? You do centralize things, and they're having to deal with this pushback when they're distributing funds. But at the same time, we're under an austerity cap that got implemented after the coup against Dilma. That was first, it was like a ceiling, expenditure ceiling, and then it became what we call the new fiscal framework, which is what the Lula government with Fernando Haddad as Minister of the Economy tried to do to adapt to it, to get a little bit more room, but it was still not enough. So we are under a ceiling, and that has made the job for the federal government even harder. It was hard to begin with because our social expenditures are huge. We do benefit from having a universal healthcare system, and we want to keep it. And we want to keep public education. We have public universities where people don't pay a single fee to attend. We want to keep that, right? And like that, I remember that being something that, when all of my colleagues in Canada were talking about student loans, like, oh, that's something that Canada could learn from Brazil, right? And we want to keep that, but the funds are just not there because we have this ceiling. They're not really allowing the country to run a bigger deficit. And I absolutely think this is a necessary expenditure. So the deficits shouldn't matter when it comes to that. But a really complicated thing happened at the same time, which is that the people in parliament, the congressmen and women, they started giving themselves bigger and bigger discretionary allowances. So they now spend a lot more out of their own pockets because they have access to a bigger share of the budget, which is not constrained the way the executive is constrained. So this is creating new inequalities, because if you have a Congress person elected from Rio de Janeiro, he might say, okay, I have this much here, and I'm going to be spending on this, this, and that. And we don't have transparency on this. We don't have
kind of ward boss system.
Yeah, it's absurd. And like there's no strategy behind it. We know this is feeding to corruption. And at the same time, they're all pointing their fingers at the presidential office and saying, you don't know how to run the country. Look at how big our deficit is. So therefore, we need to privatize more things. And it's all part of the trap that they built around, free market and things like that. You take away the money and they say, oh, you can't deal with that. So right now we just need to sell it for very cheap. And that's why we've been privatizing at the different states, but also at the national state level, many different things like sanitation, like utilities are just slipping away. Trade unions in Canada need to have a really big alliance with the trade unions in Brazil. because it's in their interest. You know, a lot of the Canadian corporations are trying to take away
Right.
utilities in Brazil, and then they fire everybody.
Right.
So this alliance is key, and this is quite important for us to understand how this business diplomatic work has been going around, and you know, things look like cooperation, but they are not cooperation. They're still a part of the resource grabs. And I do think that Lula is aware of this, but again, I don't think he has a really good handle of the situation. You know, how am I going to, what am I going to propose? What is the alternative here?
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is the PT is good at saying, okay, we can hold down the fort.
Yeah.
It could be worse.
Yeah, it's tough.
If it wasn't us,
Tough spot to be in.
it could be worse.
Right. Yeah. Right now we see.
Yeah.
Right now we see Prime Minister Carney very much using fiscal power, to give money to provinces to kind of bring people on side and force them to, play nice. But he has control of the budget because he has control of the legislature. But if you don't have control of your legislature and you can't control your budget, I can see how that would be a big problem, especially if, basically you got some petty despots who are playing kind of, local politic ward boss. That's a very difficult situation. I don't know how you beat that. What do you think?
Yeah. Presidentialism in Brazil is getting weakened every year.
Yes.
And this is sort of the situation. It's been part of our debates, a lot of newer analysis coming out of it. But I honestly don't think there's been an effort coming from the presidential office to restore some of the presidential power. And if this keeps happening, this is going to be very worrisome for, the progressive future of the country, because the legislature is historically a lot more right-wing. And if they keep allowing themselves to grab more of the budget, to have more powers, and I'm not really sure that, who's president is going to matter as much anymore.
Right.
And that's why we need this year to also push for a big renewal of Congress. We have a little bit more of a renewal of the Senate seats this year.
Yeah.
So in Brazil, the Senate is elected. This year, 2 seats are changing per state, and the Senate is very conservative, as Senates tend to be. So we are hoping that at least we get a few more good people in at the Senate level, because we definitely need that help.
Oh, well, Sabrina, thank you so much for giving us all this
great.
information, context about, a very important, the third largest economy in the Americas. I guess the second most populous country in the Americas, a key country, and in a changing region. As you've mentioned, many left-wing or center-left governments have been defeated in the last recently, and this could be one more of them. So we got elections in, I guess there'll be 2 rounds, right, in October, and now we know a lot more about what's at stake. So thank you very, very much for
Thanks
the
so much.
information. And hey, do you ever get back to Canada?
I do. I was just in Toronto almost it was first week of June, I believe.
Oh.
Yeah, I went back to I went back to visit my friends. When I try to go
Nice.
later in the year, I try to catch a hockey game sometimes. So
Okay.
it's good. I miss it. I want to go back and stay a little bit longer.
Wonderful. Well,
Oh, maybe we'll see you on a
welcome to
visit.
here. Yeah.
Yes, that'd be great.
Thanks so much, Sabrina. Okay,
Thank
we're going
you
to take
so
a quick
much.
break, and we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Love It or Heave It. Thanks.
Before we wrap, we've come to the part of the show that we call Love It or Heave It, about something one of us wants to love and keep, or something one of us would heave and forever forget. What's on your mind for this week, Tom?
Well, I'm loving a nice piece of research and comms work done by the Ontario NDP this week that resulted in the resignation of a Ford cabinet minister, and also sends some signals about how little loyalty Doug Ford has to anyone, even his own MPPs. On Tuesday morning, Global News' Colin DeMello reported Associate Tourism Minister Stan Cho, who lives just 6 kilometers from the Ontario legislature, spent more than $16,000 on downtown Toronto hotel overnight stays. Yeah. initially, Cho said he would pay back any costs that hadn't followed the rules. And that story went out. The global story got a lot of views. Canadian press started making some inquiries, and all of a sudden, Cho sent a new statement saying he was going to pay it all back. Next morning, Wednesday morning, the NDP came out with the hammer. It wasn't just Cho. There were 20 Toronto area MPPs doing this, and they'd run up over $120,000 in hotel bills. So,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
by late morning, Wednesday, Ford went into damage control, of course. And, this is not how we operate, he said. Of course, Doug, that's exactly how you operate. So, all right. And a couple hours later, the Ontario NDP launched a new website with all the details, et cetera, et cetera. So, obviously, this was not a reporter I discovered this story. This was a story that was given to him. And I did speak with the senior NDP staffer at Queen's Park and confirmed the NDP did the research and developed the comms rollout plan. So good for you guys. On Wednesday, March Stiles said every dime of this $120,000 needed to be repaid.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Ford was saying by the next day. So these 20 MPPs are now on the hook to repay $120,000 from their own pockets. Story not over yet, because on Friday comes the knife twist. Global News reported that the PCs last fall changed the rules to allow these GTA MPPs to do exactly what these 20 PC MPPs say they were doing. The PCs expanded the scope of a rule that allows a GTA MPP to stay in a downtown hotel in unusual circumstances. The original scope was really for like severe weather where you can't, transit shut down, you can't get, like it's unsafe. And they expanded it to be any night when the legislature's having a night session. So So the Global report cited documents from the Friday's story, cited documents from the Board of Internal Economy, the board that sets the MPP allowance rules, and they showed that Ford's House Leader, Steve Clark, moved the change in November, and the board has a PC majority. So with that little twist, the Premier was now faced with the prospect of reporters asking if the Premier approved of the rule change that led to the, $120,000. So, spinning away here, a major misdirection was required. So before it was even lunchtime on Friday, Minister Cho was turned into ex-Minister Cho. In his resignation letter, though, Cho says he was only staying at hotels after night sittings, just like Doug Ford's new rule allowed. A bad rule, but a bad rule the PC House Leader had created. So he's the sacrifice. And in addition, Mr. Cho has to pay $16,000 for the pleasure of being the sacrificial lamb. And so far, anyway, as of right now, the other 19 who abuse this system or use this rule, whatever you want to look at it, they get a pass. So I just say I love it because good job, Marge Stiles and team, of showing PC MPPs themselves that what most of us have known about Doug Ford for a long time, which is like, don't trust the guy. He won't stick to his word.
Yeah, interesting when the rule is there.
But it was a bad rule, and so I was only following the rules doesn't always work, especially for the rule maker. What about you? What do you got for this week, Nikki?
Yeah, really different note from yours. I'm actually loving some policy changes at work. So last March, the BC government, in work led by the Attorney General, Nikki Sharma, raised the ceiling specifically on potential damages over intimate image abuse. So we have an act in BC Intimate Images Protection Act. It's been a big piece of work. It used to be at just a $5,000 fine here, but they raised the ceiling to up to $75,000 on those damages. So I think, the reason this matters so much is, as we know, in our digital world, a photo can be shared so quickly. And if that's happening, and depending on the photo, and it happens without someone's consent, the impact can be really devastating. So this is, the origin and different ways and advocacy of this act that BC has. So the legislation gives people a way to take action quickly when there is to get an image removed from being shared from the internet, and to stop the sharing or seek compensation. So it's, obviously recognizing here that intimate images are going to be deeply personal. and that consent doesn't just disappear when the photo is taken, which is an important piece. So we actually saw what I'm loving is seeing this when policy actually comes into play in the real world. So a man was ordered to pay $20,000. So again, it was just $5,000 before, for sharing a woman's intimate images without her consent. And this is, reminds us is that there are consequences for people who do so, and then some ramifications in terms of what victims can now seek, but also that they've created through the act legal tools to hold people accountable. And this was a really strange incident of someone who was doing it sort of in a repetitive way outside of clubs and entertainment venues with multiple women. So one woman really stood up here and put an end to it, and then, of course, sought her own justice. So ultimately, we're talking about protecting privacy, restoring dignity to those who haven't had their consent, and making it clear we all have the right to control our own intimate images. So good news, I think, on moves here from BC's Attorney General.
Yeah, I like that. That's some accountability for horrendous behavior is well past due, I think, around here.
Yeah. I mean, I think at our age, we're always happy that we're not, my friends and I are always like, thank goodness the photos were not around on social media in the university and high school days, but, giving young people and not so young the opportunity now to also seek justice, I think is important.
Yeah. All right. Well, you've heard from Nikki and me. You can email us at lefteastwest@gmail.com, and you can tell us about what you're loving or heaving. And also, please follow the show by tapping the follow button on your podcast player, and that makes sure you get reminders of upcoming interviews as they're released. We got people like Ontario NDP leader Mark Stiles coming up, Jared Walker from Canadians for Tax Fairness, B. Brusk, President of Canadian Labour Congress in the next few weeks. So thank you for joining. And Nikki, have a great week.
You too, Tom.
All right, take care.
Thanks for joining Left East to West with hosts Nikki Hill and Tom Parkin. We'd love to hear your comments, ratings, follows, and shares. It helps people find us. To become a Left East to West community member and to help us reach even more Canadians, subscribe using the link in the show notes. You can watch us on YouTube or listen wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Just search for Left East to West and subscribe. I'm Doug Hamilton signing off for Left East to West. We'll see you next week.